How did we get here? Over 65 million murdered unborn children in America since 1973. Gender-confused adolescents mutilating themselves at the applause of our federal government. Pro-life sidewalk counselors being arrested. Parents who speak at school board meetings being labeled domestic terrorists by the federal government. We're all asking the same question right now, aren't we? How did we get here?
This had to be one of the most powerful documentary I have ever seen with these two eyes and listening with these two ears. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And it's addressing the issue of abortion. The title of this one is The 1916 Project, which is a spin of the 1619 Project. But the 1916 Project takes us back to Margaret Sanger and make the connection with abortion, with atheism, with the philosophy, with Judaism and the death cult of Adolf Hitler, and the current thing that's going on in society as well. And there is a biblical perspective to this thing. I will highly recommend this. I'm going to put a link in the description below. I don't bring it to you unless I really believe it is good. This is powerful stuff right here. You know, on the issue of abortion, I have spoken about it several times in this channel, and I will keep talking about this because I believe the unborn lives matter. I believe that. And I'm also for the health of the mother. And I do understand the value of womanhood. The goal is never to diminish women. But I'm crying also for the children, for the babies. And I think there is something to fight for when it comes to that. There are many things to fight for in this world. There are many stands we need to take about many issues. But when it comes to the aborting of little children in the womb by the thousands, and the number is over 65 million have been aborted, there is no reason for anybody with a Bible in their hands to stay quiet about the matter, to make it look like it's political. This is a modern day genocidal movement that is happening in society, and very few are speaking about this. In some cases, I read my comments from people who follow this channel, who claim to be Christians, Seventh-day Adventists, who are defending this. You need to repent. You really need to do that. If you keep on defending this thing, you're on a wrong track of history.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world.
First, we're going to look at the theological implication as well as the racism that is attached to this history of abortion. We're not going to go through this whole video. We're going to take segments because I'm just here to give you a sample. You know how we do here in this channel. So let's listen to that. Let's begin with this first segment.
I hope a lot of people are shocked at where we are in the culture. Something insane is happening. Madness has been unleashed in our culture. How did this happen? How did this happen so suddenly? Well, the answer is it didn't happen so suddenly. It takes a long time to go from a few intellectuals believing some bad ideas to bringing those ideas into the culture more and more and more until they bear fruit. The parallels to how Germany got to where it was in the rise of the Nazis to where we are now is extremely dramatic. It's unavoidable. The excuses church leaders gave for their silence in the 30s are precisely the same excuses many church leaders are giving today. God expects his church to be the conscience of the state. He expects believers to stand against the madness. So if believers can be lulled into a sense of complacency or into a sense of fatalism, there's nothing I can do. We've abdicated that role, and that is exactly how we got where we are now.
Why is it all of a sudden our school boards are sexually charged to confuse children? And why is our culture, even our doctors, are going against parental rights and mutilating children? What in the world is going on? Satan always goes after the young, always the young, and it's the battle for the soul of not just America, this is the battle for the soul of the world. Abortion is the #1 abomination to Almighty God. I think he's made that crystal clear. Go and study the actions of the ancient deities and what they required. This is ancient stuff. Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, and what we're seeing today is exactly what the Bible foretold. He warned Israel over and over again. He would forgive a lot of stuff, but he said, forbid not, never allow your child to pass through the fire as an offering to Moloch or Remphan, the pagan gods of the ancient world. Now, we know as believers that those are demons, but God says, you have covered my land in blood, you have sacrificed your sons and daughters, and for that I will hold you accountable.
The greatness of a nation is not its navy and army and economy, it's how it treats its most vulnerable. Leviticus 20 says if any Israelite or foreigner living in Israel sacrifices a child to Molech, that person should be put to death. If any member of the community closes their eyes when that man sacrifices his child to Molech, I myself, the Lord, will set my face against him and his family and will cut them off from Israel.
Isaiah 5:20 tells us, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. We're in a day where evil is now being called good. Truth has been turned on its head. The left does a good job of making things that are evil sound good. Instead of saying that you're killing your baby, we say simple things like, a mom deserves the right to have choice. Choice to do what? Choice to murder.
Admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision.
Critical work that Planned Parenthood does on behalf of America's women every day.
It's been nearly 100 years since the first health clinic of what later would become Planned Parenthood opened its doors to women in Brooklyn.
What Christians often don't understand in the culture wars and in the fight for life is that abortion is not just one issue among many. Abortion is almost the linchpin upon which the liberal establishment swings. But what happens when you pull out a linchpin? The door falls off. And so when Roe v. Wade gets overturned and that linchpin starts getting lifted off, the liberal establishment lost their minds because they're treating it like a religious sacrament.
When Mrs. Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in the United States back in 1916, birth control was a dirty word.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
We need to study the past, not just to understand what happened then, but to understand what's happening now.
We need to understand that Planned Parenthood is one of the largest, best funded, and most profitable 501c3s in human history. They're the second largest provider of cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers.
Their fastest growing revenue stream now is trans drugs for teens.
And they are behind all of the kooky, pornographic sex ed, gender theory, and comprehensive sexuality education in America's public schools. We are now going to put the puzzle pieces together of the Leviathan, if you will.
Every radical revolution from the French Revolution, the radical Jacobins, the revolutions of 1848, they all failed. But Margaret Sanger understood if you can change the culture, you can usher in the revolution. And she has.
So let's start putting the pieces together here to understand the culture of death in America. Where should we begin here, and how do we start tracing the revolutionaries whose hate and ideologies turned Sanger into the woman that she was?
I think a good place to start is with Thomas Malthus.
Okay.
Malthus was an English clergyman who became concerned thinking that population grows exponentially, but natural resources grow arithmetically, which in his mind meant that there was a population bomb about to occur. And so he came up with this vision of eliminating unwanted aspects of the population.
Because eventually population growth will outstrip our ability to provide food for those people.
So if we start with Thomas Malthus, we can immediately move to Charles Darwin, who read Malthus's work and began to think about the origin of species.
His book.
His book. And it's what drove his expedition on the Beagle. And there was one man who was particularly taken with the idea. It was his half-cousin, Francis Galton, who took the ideas of Darwin and then took them one step further. If we need to ensure the ascent of the good and the descent of the bad, then let's apply that to human populations. He's the father of eugenics.
So you're saying we moved awfully quickly from survival of the fittest to his cousin, Galton. Let's say
the elimination of the unfit.
Let's say might makes
right.
Yep. So we moved awfully quickly from the premise man is an animal, so it's an animal kingdom, so the strong will survive and the weak will die, to the premise the strong must kill the weak.
This then leads to a whole question about what is sex for? If it's not for reproduction, first and foremost, what is it for?
Right.
That brings us to Havelock Ellis. He becomes a sexual theorist who develops this notion that the first and most important aspect of sexuality is not human reproduction, but rather it's the exploration of what he called the innate soul.
Don't we have evidence of letters between Galton and Havelock Ellis?
Yes.
Where Ellis tells Galton that he will do his best to push forward the eugenic theory in his writings.
And he does. One of the things about Havelock Ellis was he was quite the evangelist. He believed that it was his mission not just to explore these things and to write about these things, but to begin to mentor young men and women to take this to the ends of the earth.
Wow.
It was the Great Commission flipped upside down.
That's right.
The whole purpose behind this is to overturn Western civilization.
That's right.
No gods, no masters. By this time, Marxism has been discredited as a political movement. But the notion behind Marxism of replacing the old Christendom with something fresh and new is very much alive. Now, instead of economics and politics, it's being driven by human sexuality, morality, the transformation of the family. So Havelock Ellis writes and begins to influence all of these radicals after the turn of the century. People like Emma Goldman, a famous anarchist. So Emma Goldman founds the Mother Earth magazine. And so she becomes very influential because she comes to the US and begins to mentor a whole group of Greenwich Village radicals. Because a part of the vision is if you're going to change the culture, you've got to approach it culturally.
After years of this ideological formation from her most radical friends from around the globe, this is where Sanger put her ideas into practice. Folks, this is where it all started. It was here at 46 Amboy Street in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, New York, that Sanger opened up her first unlicensed, illegal birth control clinic. Her clinic opened on October 16th, 1916, with a line of 140 immigrants stretched around the block. Now, Sanger and her sister Ethel were unable, shockingly, to find any doctors to help them out with this new revolutionary contraceptive procedure, so they illegally performed the procedure themselves. Within 9 days, the police shut down the first Planned Parenthood birth control clinic, and Sanger and her sister were sentenced to 30 days in the workhouse. They were arrested for the distribution of obscene illegal birth control methods. But this didn't stop Sanger. This was just the beginning of what would turn into the Planned Parenthood as we know it today. But why start in Brownsville? Why here? Why not where Sanger lived, in Greenwich Village, with her bohemian salons and gatherings of alcohol-filled conversations about how to overtake the world with her rich white friends? No. It was over here in Brownsville that she opened up her first Planned Parenthood, because Brownsville was a poverty-stricken neighborhood largely comprised of immigrants, Blacks, Slavs, Italians, and Jews. The very specific groups of people that Sanger defined as unfit to reproduce, those that she thought were a threat to the gene pool, to the kind of perfect and perfected human race that she was seeking to create. It was here that it all started. Ideas come from people, but people come from places. And this is where the organization we know today as Planned Parenthood began. So as soon as Sanger was released from prison, serving in the workhouse for breaking New York state law, she immediately launched the publication that would guide her ideological and Planned Parenthood's ideological foundation for the next 20 years. It was called the Birth Control Review. It was a magazine, it was a publication, which she then opened up and invited her radical eugenicist friends and contacts from around the world, some of them serving in Hitler's Third Reich, to publish their articles on eugenics in her magazine, to platform these ideas on the American and on the world stage. It was here, in the poverty-stricken neighborhood of Brownsville, that Sanger coined the term birth control and set the stage for the deeply racist eugenic ideology that resulted in the billion-dollar organization today known as Planned Parenthood. 1916. We could call this the first Planned Parenthood clinic.
Yes.
Something else happened interesting in 1916. A man named Madison Grant writes a book called The Passing of the Great Race. So now we have some of the ideology and individuals that lead to Sanger, and it's quite easy to trace the impact of these people and individuals on her life. But Madison Grant would later share office spaces with his organization, the American Eugenics Society, with the American Birth Control League when it's founded in 1921.
He was another one of the acolytes of Havelock Ellis. He was involved in all manner of radical politics prior to the establishing of the American Eugenics Society. Some of the most articulate advocates of eugenics were highly placed. In fact, one of the most horrific of all of the eugenics screeds was written by Lothrop Stoddard. Came and did his PhD at Harvard and took his dissertation, boiled it down for the masses, and created the book
The Rising Tide of Color
Against White World Supremacy. Even more shocking, Stoddard was a member of the Ku Klux Klan and was identified as the exalted cyclops of the Massachusetts KKK, where his books were recommended reading.
And is he not a founding board member of the American Birth Control League?
Yes.
Launched in 1921, later to be renamed
Planned Parenthood. Yes.
Wow.
This is the same year, by the way, 1920, that two German Jewish scholars, Karl Binding and Alfred Hoch, write a book entitled
German Jews.
They write a book titled Allowing the Destruction of Life Unworthy of Life, Its Measure and Form.
Wow.
It was a moral justification for the slaughter of the undesirable masses.
Lebensinwertensleben. Now, the Nazi Party's chief racial theorist, Alfred Rosenberg, appropriates the German term Untermensch from the English version of Lothrop Stoddard's other book, The Menace of the Underman, Untermensch, the title of Heinrich Himmler's famous Nazi propaganda book, who he would meet with in 1939 when he travels to Germany. Am I right that the Nazis got the term subhuman from the English version of Planned Parenthood's founding board member's book?
That and the book by Binding and Hoch, who were Germans, and in communication with Lothrop Stoddard, influencing all of these guys.
Now, lest you think we're jesting, folks, okay? In 1934, a German race anthropologist named Hans F. Gunther listen to this, refers to Lothrop Stoddard, the Massachusetts KKK leader, and he refers to Madison Grant, who Hitler called his book his Bible. This German race anthropologist calls Lothrop Stoddard and Madison Grant the what?
The spiritual fathers of Nazi Germany.
Wow. Who is Leon Whitney you put here?
Leon Whitney believed that it was important for the government to step in and mandate selective sterilization as a birth control measure enforced on the human weeds, those undesirable peoples.
I think Leon Whitney and Lothrop Stoddard and Madison Grant would begin writing for Sanger in her magazine that would guide her ideological foundation for the next 3 decades, the Birth Control Review.
And they were speakers at her first big eugenics conference in New York City.
The book, written in 1916, The Passing of the Great Race, the same year the first Planned Parenthood clinic is opened, that book Hitler refers to as his Bible?
His Bible. And interestingly, Lothrop Stoddard's book, you'll remember he goes and he travels to Germany and interviews Himmler and Hitler. Himmler said that Lothrop Stoddard's 2 books, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy and The Revolt Against Civilization and the Menace of the Underman. These, for Himmler, become the blueprint for the creation of the final solution.
So now, with all of these influences, with Sanger's first book, with the launching of Planned Parenthood in 1921, she then begins to transform these international relationships, not just through literature, but literally gathering some of these individuals to come from around the world at a what's this? Neo-Malthusian birth control conference.
Yeah.
Surely she didn't call it that. Surely she wasn't that overt.
No,
calling her conference a Neo-Malthusian. Thomas Malthus, there's too many people on planet Earth, so therefore we have to decide who gets to live and who gets to die, who gets sterilized, who gets to have kids and who doesn't. Are you telling me that 4 years after Planned Parenthood's founded, she calls her own conferences at the Hotel McAlpin in New York City a Neo-Malthusian conference?
She does indeed. Sanger had already been attending eugenics conferences, including the Second International Eugenics Congress in 1921, hosted by the International Federation of Eugenics Organizations, an organization led by her friend, advisor, guest writer for her magazine, the man who designed Hitler's euthanasia program, which eliminated a whole host of what they called defectives, people with disabilities, gypsies, and eventually, of course, morphs into the final solution.
This Ernst Rudin or Eugen Fischer?
Ernst Rudin.
Ernst Rudin, who was a personal advisor and friend of the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger. Ernst Rudin, who took an early role in organizing the Nazi Society for Racial Hygiene?
That's right.
Wow, the historical connection is serious, boy. This is disturbing. This is disturbing. This is why the Bible says that which has been is now, and that which is to be has already been, and God requireth that which is past. There's nothing new under the sun. It's crazy, man. This quotation is coming from C.S. Lewis from the book The Screwtape Letters. And this is what he says. The greatest evil is not now done in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not even done in concentration camps and labor camps. In those, we see his final result. But it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and munited by quiet men in clean, carpeted, well-lighted offices, by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice. Mercy. Check out the documentary and then stand for life. Don't justify this wickedness. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one. Bye.